Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us here today at West. As we mark the end of UK Mental Health Awareness Week, it's a timely moment to reflect on the mental health and well-being of those within the maritime community. Whether at sea or ashore, seafarers and their families face unique challenges ranging from trauma and neurodiversity to the emotional toll of long-term separation. Today's webinar, Building a Supportive Maritime Community Addressing Trauma, Neurodiversity and Family Support, is designed to open up these important conversations and explore how we can foster a more inclusive, compassionate and resilient maritime environment. This 1-hour session will feature 3 expert speakers who will each share insights and practical strategies from their respective fields. Following the presentations, we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session, giving you the opportunity to ask questions and engage directly with our panel. First, let me introduce you to Dr. Rachel Glynn Williams. She is a consultant clinical psychologist and EMDR practitioner and clinical director of Recall Recovery Limited. Rachel has worked for over 25 years in both the NHS and independent practice, developing expertise in mental health and psychological trauma. Married to a former seafarer, she has experienced life on board and appreciates the perspective of family ashore. In her psychological practice, Rachel works with seafarers, port and shoreside personnel, first responders, and civilians in the military services, and is an expert witness for the civil courts. She provides clinical assessment and therapies such as CBT and EMDR, critical incident support, training, mentorship, and consultation to seafarers and shore-based staff within the maritime business, charities, and professional networks. She presents at industry conferences and publishes articles and professional guidance on trauma at sea. She also has a busy private practice in Liverpool and online. As clinical director of Recall Recovery Limited, Rachel is proud to have developed with Captain Terry Ugg a trauma-informed interviewing approach to maritime investigation with integrated wellbeing support. After that, we will have Daniel Smith from Neurodiversity, a passionate advocate for neurodiversity within the maritime industry. Dan has been a career seafarer since the age of 18. Since founding Neurodiversity in early 2022, he has guided the organization through registration and growth to become the industry's leading and only authority on neurodivergence. Autistic. He has first-hand experience of the difficulties the neurodivergent community faces with the maritime space, while being all too aware of the tremendous benefits that can come with being neurodivergent. Unemployed. He continues to volunteer as much of his time as possible to pushing neurodiversity forward for the betterment of the industry. And finally, we will have Dr. Deepit Mankad. Belonging to a seafaring family and a proud daughter of a master mariner, she is the founder of MindSpeak and working within the maritime sector for 15 years. She holds a doctorate in educational psychology on multiple intelligence, is a wellness coach and client and project manager for the Sailors Society UK. Ranked number 4 in the top 100 women in shipping lists by It's All About Shipping UK 2025. She has been a pioneer in designing psychological first aid workshop for the maritime industry in India, a pioneer in carrying out the first ever survey on mental health awareness in India, which was endorsed by the Director General of Shipping India. She has trained over 5,000 cadets in the Wellness at Sea program and trained over 4,000 officers in psychological first aid. She has received the prestigious Bharat Vibhushan Puraskar on the 22nd of November 24 at the Delhi Vidhan Sabha, conferred by the Honourable Parliament Speaker Shri Viskas Goel. She's provided training services to companies like Fleet Management, Dynacom Tankers, Pacific Basin, TriStar Management, Goodwood Marine Services, Synergy, Wilhelmsen, Scorpio, and many more. And she works as a consultant for the Sagar Men Yog and a training subcommittee member of the Sagar Men Saman project of the Director General of Shipping India. And she conducts counselling for seafarers and their families. If you use the Q&A box throughout, I shall keep an eye on this and come back to the Q&A questions at the end. So I'll hand it over to you now, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you ever so much to West and to Emma and to Tom for inviting myself and Recall Recover to be part of this webinar. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed now and try and share the right screen. We might have liftoff. That's great. Hopefully you can see that. Yes, so I'm delighted to be joining you today to talk about a trauma-informed maritime industry for ship and for shore. And so this is just a quick overview of where I'm going to be going with this over the next 15 minutes. We'll be talking a little bit about incidents at sea and the human survival stress response. We'll be talking about the impact of events, how this impacts ourselves as humans and seafarers and shoreside folk as a result of those incidents. Then we'll be looking at a trauma-informed maritime industry, in particular what we can do in terms of planning and preparing, responding and helping people recover from incidents when they do happen. We'll then cover some key points just as a refresh. So just a whistle-stop tour. So this is just an overview of the rationale and areas to consider today. So first of all, looking at the incidents at sea. These will be obviously quite familiar to people, unfortunately, for those who do work with incidents. Sort of personal injury, loss of life, piracy, fires, collision, machinery failure. All of these are examples of critical incidents, and I've put bad news from home in italics at the bottom because although that's not necessarily a casualty, it's not a big T trauma, if you like, for people. It can mean that it can affect someone's well-being and can feel very much to them as a critical incident. And this is what can make an event more impactful. There are various factors thought to influence how impactful that can be. Being directly involved or harmed, closeness to those involved, for those undergoing concurrent stress as well. And we know that for seafarers, they're already working within isolated, challenging, high risk, high reliability environments, often far away from loved ones for long periods of time, and their usual ways of coping. For some, they're managing fatigue, long hours, questionable manning situations in some cases. So certainly concurrent stress is an important consideration when we're thinking about stress at sea. Other changes that can make somebody more likely to feel something as traumatic, was impactful, whether it's their close colleague, whether there's a sense of helplessness along with the incident itself, the size and seriousness of it, and also thinking about the high levels of distress in others. Particularly important when we're considering the impact for onboard leaders and perhaps for those managing from the shore side. And so we know that incidents have been slowly declining over recent decades, but things can still be impactful. And so there are these individual and contextual factors that we need to consider in a response. But here is what we all bring as humans to an incident. People may be familiar with this already. A stressful event occurs, the brain detects a threat, and then out of a sort of relatively small range of options, there's our brains and bodies decide on the most appropriate immediate hardwired response: fight or flight, freeze, flop and fawn. Essentially, these are various changes in our physical, our mental, our cognitive state, our emotions and our behaviour. And all of these are really important and hardwired biological responses to help us deal with an immediate threat and sudden change in our environment. So whether it's a stolen wallet, a burglar, something crashing, big crashing noise when you're in your cabin, or a fire on the deck, as humans, this is an important reaction that we all have. And So whilst we're shaking, where our heartbeats are racing, our thoughts are perhaps very, very narrow or widespread. We got that anxiety and our behaviours keeping us front foot, ready to respond. All of that can feel very, very strange and uncomfortable for a while, but it's necessary, and it can stay around just for a little while until that emergency is dealt with or is put to one side. It's short-lived, and it can settle down fairly quickly. We might have, this is the window of tolerance, which people might be familiar with this. We might have our moments of arousal. So after that incident has started, we might sort of be aroused, we might be vigilant, but enough just to galvanise us into action. Or alternatively, if we're different, we might be just sort of, rabbit in the headlights type experience just for a moment. But usually we can get back into our window of tolerance where we're calm enough to engage and do what's necessary. Though sometimes, because of the context, the severe or distressing nature of the event or ongoing stresses, fears around employment, blame, harsh investigations, whatever's happening in terms of that in terms of that event on board, it can be more challenging to find one's window of tolerance at times. And it can, and if it does linger, it can affect well-being and performance. These are just a quick few stats. I won't linger on these too much, but in 2021, myself and Alandia did a survey of their customers and online, asking a number of different questions about the impact of events for them. And we asked, have you had an incident on board which was stressful, shocking or frightening? And 50% of those responding said yes. And we asked the question, did the way you feel after the incident affect your job performance? And that 18% are the people that said no. So out of that, we can assume that 82% of people said that it did have an effect on their job performance, which was obviously very eye-opening for ourselves with Alandia. And there's some other research there saying that people who've experienced shipwreck or severe personal injury on board have 83% of intrusive symptoms, by which means flashbacks or nightmares, some kind of experience like that. And so yeah, we've got reason enough here. The research still needs to be more robust, but we've got enough evidence there to say that we need to be thinking about this. And of course, when it affects well-being, we need to be concerned, but also if it's affecting operational effectiveness and safety, we should really be turning towards this, especially as 90% of incidents are thought to have a human factors element. So being a more aware, trauma-informed industry may help bring more pieces of the jigsaw together. So here's some quick definitions. A trauma is an event that can have physical or emotional, is thought to be emotionally or physically harmful or life-threatening to a person, and it can have lasting effects on the individual. And a trauma-informed system, or a workplace, for example, recognises that fact, recognises that people may have experienced difficult times, and ensures that the way that they interact and the environments that they provide are designed to prevent causing further harm. So in terms of considering a trauma-informed industry, myself and Terry, we use a sort of business continuity model. And so that means we're interested in what we can do before, immediately after, and following an incident to ensure that people and processes are protected and can recover and restore normal operations as soon as possible. So we're going to go through each one of these areas now, just as a little amuse-bouche, just to give you a little idea about what each of these is about. So first of all, prevention. This has sort of three main objectives: to understand the risk of psychological harm in the workplace, to minimise the risk for those crew and shore staff once we know what those hotspots might be, and then to learn from the workforce about the impact of events when they do occur. So this may involve, doing audits, learning from crew about where their psychological hotspots might be. It can be difficult for people to come forward with those, and some may do so more readily than others, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be asking those questions. We can do something about those hotspots. Is there something about people feeling anxious in tight spaces? Is there something about bullying on board? let's know about that and work on that to minimise that. And so just listening to the workforce and learning from incidents. Oh, is that going to, here we go. Planning and preparing. So sometimes we can prevent incidents if we know where people are finding those. Sometimes we can't necessarily foresee them, but we can assume that things might happen in these sometimes unpredictable environments. And so we need to build resilience in individuals. Understanding that human stress response and how to manage it in self and others can be a really helpful intervention to help build resilience in individuals and teams and crews. And also building some insulation in the environment. Have a looking at the environment and just seeing what can enhance general well-being. For example, psychological safety, that freedom to speak up. Having some great social times and spaces together, having internet to connect with that in very important social connections after an event, decent food. Oh my word, speaking to anyone on board, you will always know that food is key to well-being. So it's these other factors more generally that serve as a buffer, serve as insulation to stuff that might happen on board. So it's just thinking about those things. And also having a look at things that might harm again. So making sure that our bullying processes are up to date and are used and fit for purpose. So this is about responding now. So when something does happen, we need to be able to respond as effectively and as efficiently as possible when crew or staff may have been impacted by events, and also to reduce the possibility of further harm. And so in that early response, it is about that psychological first aid. It is making sure that that people have that immediate social environment where they can vent if they need to and get access to support where they need it. So it's not counselling, it's not talking about it endlessly, it's just giving people what they need at that moment. Sometimes this can be very effectively delivered by peer support systems, by people on board who are trained perhaps in trauma-informed practice, and can have those useful conversations with their colleagues when the difficult stuff happens. Sometimes it can be about bringing in external professionals to ensure that the whole crew is looked after where there's more pronounced difficulties, and also very useful for leaders. But they might be particularly busy if there's incidents on board and lots of investigations happening. And so reducing the possibility of further avoidable harm. This is where myself and Terry have done some work, because when I first met Terry, here's Terry on the right there, and this is our early album cover, as you can see. Terry was very concerned about the harm that his investigations might be doing by asking people to go through in detail the kind of, perhaps one of the worst incidents they've had, but also the information, the quality of the information coming back to him, as he's been concerned about that at times. So we put our expertises together, and we developed Recall Recover and the TIMS, trauma-informed interviewing in a marine setting, to use what we know about human reactions to stress and recovery to inform the process and the structure of marine investigations. We know that people can feel these investigations really quite harsh at times. And so this is a way of diminishing that whilst at the same time achieving the best possible evidence and contributing to early restoration of normal operations. Time doesn't allow me to go on about this too much, but please do contact myself or Terry afterwards if you'd like to know some more. This is the recovery bit. So this is where many people we know recover well, but for some it's less likely. Perhaps they develop problems with their mood, or with panic or nightmares or avoidance, and so it's important that folks can have access to pathways that support evidence-based pathways. So not just what happens to be on Google or what happens to be at hand. It's really important that these are evidence-based, again, just continuing that don't do any harm idea. And also to have procedures in place which can enable people to return to their role following recovery. So here's just some ideas. So where difficulties remain or become worse, obviously have charities and employee assistance programs on board. Here are some important sort of psychological interventions, again, really evidence-based, researched well, and they work online, they work in person, they can work in groups, and these can really make a difference. So it's not that if you have a mental health struggle, you're stuck with it. Absolutely not. It's very, you can get very quick results, very quick recoveries from folks where they can engage in this well. These are things for shoreside and onboard leaders to consider as well. It's about that trauma-informed managed repatriation, leave of absence and return to work planning. So make sure that actually when people have recovered, they can come back on board, because there is great evidence to suggest that post-traumatic growth exists, that when people have struggled with something in a context and they've recovered, they come back on board and they can really add to the sort of psychologically safe and trauma-informed culture. Just a little bit about shoreside as well, and then we're running a little bit over time. So just in terms of shoreside, just a quick indulgence from Mr. Rogers, if I may. This is a chap that has done television shows in the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s over in America. He would say that when I was a boy and would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers, you will always find people who are helping. And it's the same in Maritime as well. We're aware that people who are in the humanitarian industries, the counselling industries, therapies, even sort of justice, trauma-informed justice now, but are we also aware of the surveyors, the solicitors, the DPAs, the superintendents who come on board and who are dealing with people who have been involved in quite distressing incidents? I've put a row of houses here because many of these folks will not be on board somewhere or in an office. They'll be working in their front box room like I am. And so it's quite an isolating experience. And so we need to be aware of the impact of events, in the impact of what they might hear, what they might experience, and also be aware of things like burnout, sort of low mood, but also vicarious or secondary trauma. When the stuff that you're hearing and dealing with, photographs that come through, videos that come through, distressed relatives, some of these things can end up just living with you a little bit longer. So again, do seek some support. Quite rightly, we're only all human. And so these are the key points. Incidents happen. Human stress response is usually short term. Evidence suggests that post-incident well-being and work performance can be impaired. And there are things that we can do to make things worse, but there are also things that we can do to make things better as well. So that's just a summary of where we've been today, with a little diagram. And please do contact myself or Terry if you'd like any more discussion. Thank you. So I should pass on now. I think, is it going to be Dan next?
I think that's the plan. I hope that's the plan. Thank you much, Rachel. And let me just share my screen and let's hope this all goes well. There we go. Right. So thank you much again to Wes for inviting me here today to talk about neurodivergence, sort of neurodiversity, and why it's really important from a mental health aspect to, I guess, kind of look inwardly at the programs we have as businesses and as organizations, and to ask ourselves, are we actually have we missed a group of people out that are statistically more susceptible to mental health issues and mental health trauma than the average kind of individual? But I'm aware that for a lot of us, neurodiversity is a very new concept. You know, for those of us in, I guess, the UK, it may be something we all know about. Some of us may have our own lived experience of it, but for a lot of you, you may not do. So what we're going to do today basically is we're going to run through what neurodiversity is. We're going to run through what I call the Holy Trinity, which are the different conditions that are classed as being neurodivergent. We're then going to look at why it's important to take neurodiversity seriously, the benefits that can come from having a neurodivergent workforce that we enable properly. And then we're going to look at kind of the barriers in place that are preventing us from realizing those benefits. And then least but not last, we're going to suggest some ideas on how we can remove those barriers and we can now work together as an industry to push forward to create a more neuro-inclusive and hopefully better industry for us all. Okay. So when we say neurodiversity, what do we mean? In its really simplest sense, neurodiversity is just the differences in the way our brains work. You know, it's how I will think differently from someone else, who thinks different from somebody else, who thinks different from somebody else. The challenge is that it's actually a bit more complex than that, because human beings being what we are, we like to make things a little bit more difficult than they should be. So we, as human beings, have decided that there are actually two groups of people. So we have those who what we would consider typical, and those who think somewhat differently. So if you think differently from what we consider to be typical, you are said to be neurodivergent, which means you have a neurodivergence, which means essentially your brain works differently from the norm. Yeah, kind of simple, straightforward, but also big fancy word that makes things just far more complex than it needs to be. So when someone actually is different, they're classed to be neurodivergent. So in my case, because I'm autistic, being autistic is the neurodivergence that makes me neurodivergent, if that makes sense. I know it's a little bit complex to understand. It is what it is, unfortunately. It's just the way the medical world has decided that we want to use these words to kind of separate things out. And if someone is what we consider to be typical, they are classed as being neurotypical, i.e. they learn, behave, and process things how society expects. But again, it gets even more complex than that, because actually, you could argue that we're all neurodivergent because we all think differently, right? Unfortunately not. So we have, as a society, decided that there's a couple of conditions that we will classify as being neurodivergent, that make people think and act and process differently enough that they need to be, and I use the word need with air quotes here, to be classified as different. So in reality, those conditions are ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism and Asperger's syndrome, although it's important to note here that Asperger's syndrome is no longer given as a diagnosis. It's now been rolled into, it was high functioning autism, now it's less support needs autism, but I've included it here because a lot of people who have that diagnosis continue to identify behind that diagnosis and not just being called autistic. So I'm just trying to be a bit more inclusive and encompassing of everybody here. Then we have the last group, which are SPLDs, or specific learning differences. And these primarily focus and impact how people will learn. ADHD and autism / Asperger's syndrome, they will impact far more, not just learning, but also they can impact social communication, sensory processing, and the likes, whereas SPLDs, or specific learning differences, are particularly focused on learning. So that's things like reading, writing, maths, etc. But we'll get to that in a minute. So ADHD in a bit more detail. Basically, it used to be considered that you had to be hyperactive and inattentive. So thinking back to when we were at school, I'm sure some of us can remember our classmates who would sit and fidget all the time, wouldn't focus, staring out the window, were always full of energy. In the past, those people used to struggle because they weren't given the correct support they needed. But now we recognize that those individuals actually have ADHD. But we've now gone one step further to recognize that whereas in the past you had to be both inattentive, so, couldn't focus, staring at the window, and also full of energy, we've now realized actually you can be hyperactive or inattentive, but that doesn't mean that you're not ADHD. You can now be one or the other and still classed as being an ADHD or having ADHD. It's kind of described, the best way to think about it is having many tabs open in your brain at once. I'm sure those of us, who work in an office, some of us will have one tab open on, Firefox or whatever browser you use, Chrome, and that's all we can focus on. Whereas ADHD is kind of like having 1,000 tabs open all at once that are all playing some sort of song or sound or flashing lights or whatever, and your brain is kind of flicking between each tab rapidly to figure out which one's most exciting. And when it finds that, it'll focus on it. So typically, this ends up being quite disruptive. So you learn coping mechanisms. So a lot of people will fidget. because by fidgeting, it's something they can use to distract themselves. So they can focus on a task that is not quite as engaging as they'd like it to be. So they may shake their leg, shake a pen, they may doodle, whatever. I mean, for my own personal life, my partner has ADHD, and she will sit and watch television whilst also scrolling on the phone, because that way she can focus on both the television and on her phone. Whereas if you take the phone away, she can't focus on anything at all. Bit of an out there thing, but it happens. Which means that because they need this rapidly changing stuff that provides a dopamine hit and they can latch onto, they really enjoy rapidly changing environments or variable environments where things may not be the norm all the time. Things may be breaking quite often, or things may be somewhat more complex and may not stick to the plan because something has happened, which now means you need to think of something else. The opposite of this, however, is autism, which is what I have, although officially I have Asperger's syndrome. But so autism is basically the opposite of ADHD in that you enjoy consistency. You enjoy very, very structured, ordered environments where, there is a set rule book that you have to follow. There's a set list of requirements that you have to keep to. So for example, for me, being a watchkeeping officer, it's fantastic because I know that the rule book says I have to do this, this, and this. I know that the SMS says I have to do X, Y, and Z. I know that standing orders say I have to do A, B, C. It's fantastic for me. It's the same stuff day in, day out, the same routine, the same getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, etc. But it's really important to understand that whilst I am the stereotypical autistic person that we all see in the media as, the straight white male, as it were, it affects both men and women equally. It used to be a case of you couldn't be autistic as a woman, or you had to be very severely autistic. That's not the case. That's more of a skew from how we used to view things. It can now affect women and men equally, and there's a lot of evidence to say actually it may impact women more than men, but that's kind of ongoing area of research, if you like. People who are autistic will stim and fidget in the same way that someone who's ADHD will stim and fidget, but they will do it to remain calm. They will do it as a way of controlling and having some consistent sensory input. It can cause logical and literal thinking. As I alluded to before, I like structure, and I think most autistic people will agree with that you like consistency, you like structure, you like there is a plan that is going this way, let's stick to it. But that doesn't mean we're inflexible. Part of the advantage of being both autistic and an ADHD and also having an SPLD is that you are very good sometimes at seeing things that others wouldn't. You can think outside the box a lot easier. You can see a lot more detail than others will potentially do. And you're also far more capable of what I like to call constructive questioning, in that you will like to say, okay, so I've been told to do this, right? So can you help me understand why it's this way? Because my head is suggesting we do it the other way. So I'm very keen to understand, so why has it got to be this way? Okay, so that now makes sense. You explain it to me, thank you very much. Or sometimes, well, okay, I see what you want to do that way, but have you thought about doing this way because it can be quicker, it can be easier, it can be safer, it can be cheaper? Which is a real advantage the industry doesn't seem to like for some reason. Although I have my own suspicions as to why, but we won't get into that today. The last of our trinity are what we call specific learning differences, or SPLDs. So in reality, that's dyslexia, which is kind of the most commonly known of the SPLDs, really. We used to say it was difficulty with the written word. Essentially, it means that you may struggle to read because you may be switching words around and letters around, so things can appear jumbled on the page. It's not that you are unable to read, it's just that sometimes you have to reread the same sentence because you may have mixed a word up and you realise, or you may have mixed a B and a D up, for example. For some reason, again, the maritime industry doesn't like dyslexic individuals. I don't know why, because they make fantastic engineers. Whilst you may struggle to do things like with handwriting, for example, give them a practical task and they will excel. Again, speaking as a deck officer, I would much rather have an engineer on board who's dyslexic than not, because I know that when things are up to the wall, as it were, and we're in a pinch, an engineer will find a solution to a problem using some gaffer tape, baling twine, I should say, and some wood we had lying around. They are fantastic at it because they are so accustomed to working with their hands. They're great. Dyspraxia is kind of the only, well, there's two conditions that will impact kind of your fine and gross motor control. Dyspraxia is one of them, and we'll touch on the one in a bit. And basically, this impacts handwriting and anything that's really fine, like chart work and drawing. So anybody who knows me will know my handwriting is atrocious. I can just about string a sentence together, but it may be something that only I can read. Again, can make some issue, can cause some difficulties on board ship where crew may not be as understanding, or where the third officer gets lumped with the paperwork. It can be somewhat more challenging. But now we've transitioned away from paper logs and paper charts, and we're shifting over to ECDIS and electronic logbooks and what have you. It's becoming far less of a barrier than it used to be, and it's now been rebranded as is the 21st century way as being DCD, or developmental coordination disorder. Same thing, different name. A bit like New Coke. Same thing, just different name, basically. Dyscalculia is basically dyslexia, but with numbers. So you may struggle to do written maths because you may be mixing numbers around and jumbling things up. You may write, you may read a multiplication sign as a plus sign, for example. Again, can be somewhat of a limitation when you are doing written arithmetic, but again, now we've shifted away from doing maths on paper to maths on computer and calculators. It's less a barrier than it used to be. And then dysgraphia is essentially dyspraxia, or DCD, but only impacts handwriting. So it's the only one of the, or it's the other one of the two conditions I mentioned that impact your motor control skills. So this traditionally means that you can do gross motor control, so you can walk and feed yourself and all the rest of it, no issues at all. But when it comes down to the really fine nitty gritty of handwriting something very neatly, you'll struggle. Again, used to be a barrier, is now less of an issue. Now it transitioned away from paper stuff to being electronic. But it's a shame that we still see these things as barriers or as issues, because they have tremendous benefits. Pattern recognition skills can be fantastic amongst autistics or ADHDers. Attention to detail, again, autistic, ADHD is fantastic for this, especially if the task is, or the thing they're doing is something that actually holds their interest, which, I'm sorry to say, given the way the maritime industry is at the moment, anybody who is autistic or ADHD who works in maritime has an interest in it. So they're going to be able to focus on it, forever and a day, because it's something that interests them. If they didn't, they wouldn't be here because of the way the industry treats these individuals, unfortunately. High employee retention. Something really important that we do at the moment is a crewing crisis. If you treat someone who's neurodivergent properly, they will stay with you for life. I was at a PNI club recently, I won't name them. I was surprised that whilst the average tenure there was about 10 years, 11 years, the number of individuals who are neurodivergent who've been there for 20 years plus was shocking. And they also the same thing. It's because they treat us as human beings. They see the advantages that we can bring them. So we're going to stay here because we recognize they've helped us and we want to pay it back, basically. This can also mean you have greatly increased productivity, because not only have you got the same people on board the same ship who understand how it works, and they're going to be there every rotation, so they know all the little quirks of the different machinery that may not perform quite the way you think it was, and how if you want to strip this tank, you have to have this bath condition and vice versa. But it also means that, someone who is autistic, for example, because normally you have a much greater attention to detail than the average individual, you can work far faster, far faster. FinTech has found that in some cases it can be up to 150% faster for an autistic individual to do a job than average, because that individual's strengths really work well on that job, and it's a synergy that works well. Out-of-the-box thinking, that's more towards your dyslexia or your ADHD, other SPLDs, because you're so accustomed to having to think of solutions to your own trouble and your own issues and your own difficulties that you can apply that anywhere. High resilience we touched on, increased adaptability, again, out-of-the-box thinking, and levels of concentration and attention to detail that are higher than the average. Again, this goes for every single condition here, not just autism, not just SPLDs. I know we all think of ADHD as someone who can't concentrate or fidget all the time. That's not the case. If it's really engaging and interesting, which again, being in maritime, it has to be, otherwise you won't be in maritime, you'll find that actually you can be far more efficient than you'd think. Barriers we've touched on, but in general, stuff from SOLAS, SCW that haven't fixed yet. There's no accessibility standards in general within maritime at the moment. Technology is still maturing, still hasn't standardized. We are still given limited thought to usability. I'm sure anybody who uses Nectis here will know that whilst we suggest a screen that's about that big is fantastic for Nectis, in reality, it's an absolute nightmare to use, especially going from a chart that's, this big to this big. And we have yet to realize that for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure why. Recruitment can be a major issue for us because we don't understand that individuals may not fit into a certain mold that we're accustomed to, but that's not a bad thing. But because we are so accustomed to working in that specific mold, we don't like to venture out of it. And because of that, we end up excluding a lot of people who make fantastic seafarers. They make fantastic technical superintendents, you name it. And then I guess the other issue is just awareness. We are so accustomed to seeing a very stereotypical seafarer. We are now starting to break this, which is fantastic. We now have greater awareness of gender issues, for example, but we are so accustomed to you must fit a certain mold that if you don't, you can't work at sea, that we end up, significantly limiting the talent that can come into the industry, and then limiting it even more in terms of talent that will then stay in the industry. So to summarize all my waffle, which I recognize has been quite long, and I know we're up against the clock here a little bit. Lower inclusivity causes poor mental health because you're under more stress at work, you're suffering more, you're having to work harder to try and keep up your colleagues, which means greater overall cost. Increased number of claims, increased turnover, increased hiring costs, you name it. So we have to do something about this, right? This cannot continue. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a situation in a couple of years where we're sat here going, well, why has it all gone wrong? So how do we fix it? What is the key solution to this? Near term, review our HR policies and practices to make sure they're inclusive. This may be a case of, do we actually have a policy that covers reasonable adjustments, or that covers neurodivergence, or covers inclusive hiring? We may well not do, or it may be very limited. It may be time to look at it and go, okay, that's served its purpose, but things have moved on. Let's keep up the times. Let's move on as well. Greater awareness within fleets and crews. It may be a case of you may have this policy and procedure in place that supports neurodivergence or other forms of inclusivity, but it's not known. It's not advertised. So let's do something about that. It could be looking at our SMS to make sure it's more humanistic and more inclusive where it needs to be, or that our leadership styles on board have moved away from the traditional old school Western European approach where it's very hierarchical, where the master is a master and cannot be challenged. And, then the chief officer is his second in command or her second in command, to a case of, well, actually, let's have an open door. Let's say you can challenge me. You can say, well, I get you want to do as captain, but have you thought this way? Or why are you doing this? Let's look at that and let's use that instead. Let's enable people to speak up properly, as it were. And long-term, cultural shift is the biggest thing we can do. Push it from the top down and bottom up that we must have inclusive companies, because if we're inclusive, we can maintain our staff, retain our staff, and we can hire the best staff possible for our business. That's all from me. Thank you much for listening to my waffle today. Please do feel free to reach out to me if you want to have a chat privately, send me an email, whatever. And I believe I shall now hand you over to Dipti from, I forget where you're from, I'm afraid. But yeah, so I'll hand over to Dipti for her thing. Thank you much.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. All right, so we are going to now move into understanding family, and we are going to understand how that is so important for seafarers' well-being as well. So I'm going to share my window and just see. Okay, 1 second. Let me just. Okay. All right. I hope it's. All right. So I'm going to be speaking a bit on family, and of course, how family is the seafarer's anchor when it comes to the people who are working on board. So when we typically talk about seafarers being out at sea, there was one very interesting study which was done to find out what are the different stress levels aboard a ship. And separation from family ranked as number one of the causes of stress to seafarers. So, whenever we are talking about seafarers who are out at sea for a long period of time, they are prone to a lot of other pressures on board. And sea itself is a very unpredictable place, right? Each day can be different, each day can have its own challenges. So, there are a lot of things which the seafarers face. And staying away from family is not as easy as it seems like when it comes for them when they're working for more than 6 to 7 months at a stretch away from their home. Now, there are a lot of factors that determine the impact on the family life of seafarers, right? So let's have a look into what are the different factors. So first one is prolonged separation. Now, when the seafarers go out to work at sea, there are times when they could be expected to stay longer than their contract period as well. So emotional strain can come up on the seafarers. Now, this happens purely because of the physical absence which they face with their family. Loneliness can also be a big problem, and they could have a certain emotional disconnect because you're only connected through the digital world. Now, parental absence, of course, when one of the seafarers working out at sea, say, for example, the seafarer is out at sea and one parent, that is the mother of the child, is staying, they miss the family. Of course, they miss family, but the children also miss out on a lot of things with their father. Now, many a times the seafarer misses on certain important milestones which we come. Say, for example, the first time your child learned to walk, maybe your husband was not there to see it, right? The first word which your child ever spoke, maybe he was not there to hear it. So there is a lot of milestones which they could miss because of the professional requirement which comes along with seafaring. Also, marital stress, separation can weaken emotional bonds or even increase misunderstanding sometimes. And this, as a counselor, I have found in the past couple of years, there is a lot of friction and tension which has increased amongst the spouse when it comes to being out at sea. The second important factor is communication challenges. Of course, you do have internet on board now. They do connect with families, but many a times it could be irregular connections, irregular communication also. So because of the time zone differences, they travel through different time zones and the work demand can be really high at times, which could lead to a delay in response from the ship. Now, because of this, it can give rise to a feeling of anxiety, a feeling of being disconnected with your loved one. And sometimes you may be having some challenges back at home and you are desperate to share that with your spouse and you want some solutions. And these resolving of conflicts could take time. So that could also add on to a feeling of loneliness for the seafarer because he is not knowing what is happening back at home. And for the family, for the wife, it could be a feeling of too much pressure because she's not able to resolve certain issues which require the attention of the husband. The third aspect are role shifts and burden. I'm sure those who have seafarers who are out at sea, we as mothers or as wives, we have to take care of the entire household in his absence. So the burden of household responsibility sometimes can be overwhelming because, we tend to think that, oh God, I have to manage everything, right from the bills to kids' schools, to their projects, to parents. There is a lot of things which we have to take on when our spouse is out at sea. Also, sometimes decision making. So the onshore partner may feel burdened when she or he has to take a family decision on their own, right? So while the seafarer might feel that he's left out of it. that I'm at sea and I'm not asked when important decisions are being taken. So these role shifts and burdens can also be pretty taxing for the family members of seafarers. The fourth is reintegration challenges. Now, whenever the seafarer comes back home, say after an 8-month contract or a 6-month, 9 months contract, it takes a while for them to set into the home environment again. And this happens because they have lived a very different lifestyle, a different discipline when they're out at sea. So for them also, it's going to take a while to set into the domestic responsibilities. They need to adjust with it and they might take time. Role conflicts can also happen because as a mother, when we are raising the children in the absence of our husband, there are a lot of things we do according to our requirement, which we feel is right, correct? As how we parent our children. But when he comes back home after 6 months or 9 months, maybe there could be a little friction in understanding and adapting to our way of parenting as well. So that could sometimes lead to some tension or confusion between the spouse as well. So how do we maintain good relationship? Right? Now, as a seafarer and as a wife of a seafarer, or vice versa, because we could have maybe the wife is sailing and the husband is at home as well. Or maybe both are seafarers and they both do contracts one after the other. So, how do you maintain a good long distance relationship? So, first thing, you need to prioritize open and honest communication. It's very important to have transparency in any relationships. So, first, you need to give regular updates to the spouse who's out at sea. Because please remember, they are cut off from the social life, they are cut off from the shore life, they are cut off from a lot of things which you may be experiencing at home. So you need to regularly update them, message them, mail them, video call them. Of course, today technology is such you can do Skype calls, you can do WhatsApp calling, right? So give them regular updates from your end as to what is happening back home. Share your daily life. So whenever you connect over the phone, it's very important that you talk about what is happening back home. If maybe your child has done extremely well in exams, or maybe has got some award, has participated in some event, you have done something different. Please share that on regular basis so that your seafarer does not feel left out. And express emotions. Okay, you need to express how you feel. It's not only about expressing, uh, you know, your anger or frustration sometimes, but it's also very important to express love to maintain that emotional intimacy with your spouse, right? You have to say it. We cannot always imagine, no, the other person will understand. No, sometimes it's important to express and to speak out what you feel. So small bits, you should try, and every time before hanging up the phone, you can tell him that, yes, I really love you and I really miss you, and once you're back, we can do certain things together, but please express your emotions. Second is to establish family rituals and traditions. So, what could be a family ritual? Now, I belong to a seafarers family. When my father used to sail, he's 78 now. So, during his time, there was no internet connection at all, right? No video calling. And the contract lengths used to be like 11 months and even a year. But a family ritual which we had set, and in fact, I would say he set it, was every Sunday at 9 a.m., our phone used to ring. And he used to make that call and he used to talk to each one in the family, myself, my brother, my mother, his, and my grandmother. And it became like a ritual. The second ritual which he set up was, even though he's out at sea, our birthday gifts and my mom's anniversary gift used to reach on time on the same day. And that made us feel so special, right? But it should also be the other way around. So possibly you could also have virtual celebrations. You could do a Skype call on the birthday. Maybe you can have a pre-recorded video, your children pre-recording a video and sending it on his birthday. It makes them feel really wanted and special. Third one is, the third one is you have to practice mutual respect and understanding. Now, respect, I feel, is very, very important. And it's more important, I think it comes before even love, right? Because where there's respect, there will always be abundance of love. So you need to acknowledge each other's roles, recognize the sacrifices and responsibilities of each other. So as being ashore, being back, taking care of children, parents, and other things is equally important as your husband or your spouse going out at sea and working for the family. So avoid blame. Do not try and say that, okay, if I would be there, this would not have happened. No, that's not right. I think as parents, both are equally responsible for maintaining good positive relationship as well as the upbringing of the children as well. So rather than that, focus on solutions. If there is an issue, resolve it. Try and focus on how you can solve it. Also have age appropriate explanations for children. The children also need to understand why the seafarers are not there at home for 6 months or 8 months, right? So, how they work, what they work, show them videos, show them what a seafarer's work is like, so that they also grow up with respecting their father or mother, whoever is out at sea, and keep the bond alive. So let the child send, letters or drawings or paintings when they make it. If somebody is joining the vessel, you can tell the company to, take it along, and somebody can deliver that to your husband and to the children's father. It makes them feel so special, right? So try and keep that bond alive. The fourth is to share responsibilities equitably. Now, there would be times where he is not around you. But when he's back, what can you do at that point of time to make sure that every responsibility is shared equally amongst both of you? All right. Respect the routines also. So when the seafarer also comes back, he should also respect the kind of effort you're putting into in his absence, and try not to change too much in the routine. Because remember, after a few months, he will again go back to sea, and then you will be back again managing everything on your own. So try and speak and share responsibilities so that each one of you feel that you all are equally involved in maintaining family relationships. Now, at Sailor Society, we offer 24/7 helpline counseling numbers to all of you, and it is absolutely free of charge. All right. Now, Sailor Society is based out of in UK in Southampton, and it has completed 204 years this year. So we have, specially for families, we have helpline numbers wherein if you ever feel anxious or you ever feel the need that you need to vent out, you need to speak to someone, you can access the 24/7 helpline numbers. Another very good thing which we have here is the family peer-to-peer support group. Now, here, if you ever want to be a part of the peer support group, again, like I said, it's absolutely free for you all. You can go to our website and you can sign in for the peer-to-peer support group, family peer support group. So these groups are smaller groups, and wherein you can ask questions, you can share what you feel. If you have any query, you need some kind of help and support, you can ask for it through the peer-to-peer support group. And this peer-to-peer support group is actually, us at Sailor Society, one of our very strong pillars. And this is something which we provide to not only seafarers, but we also have for seafarers' family, right? So try and sign in for it. Be a part of the peer group. You never know when you will need it. And these are some of our contact details. So we have a crisis response network as well. So in case your seafarer is out at sea, they need support and they're stuck and they have some major concerns, they can also access any service of Sailor Society free of charge. You can download it either on your phone. You can also access it by going to our website, and it is multilingual as well. So you can choose whom you wish to speak to in which language, and you will always have support from Sailor Society when you need it. Right? So this brings me to the end of my presentation, and thank you so much for listening. I'm going to hand it over now back to Emma.
Thank you very much, DPT. I found all of those presentations very interesting. I suppose I should mention why I found those all very interesting. With my background, I originally worked as a mental health nurse before I then left that and ran away to sea for 10 years as a deck officer. And now I've been here with West for the last 5 years working as a loss prevention officer. So that's my background and my interest in the subject. I'll ask the speakers if they could just turn back on their cameras and mics so we could have a short Q&A. I realise the time is a bit pressing, but I think a couple of questions would be nice. One question I was kind of thinking that could tie all areas together is a kind of policy. Like, do shipping companies have policies on, trauma and what to do with trauma at sea and neurodivergency, and maybe not quite a policy on family support, but maybe guidance? In your experience, have you found that shipping companies have had these kind of policies? And if you haven't, do you think they would be beneficial, and what would be a good starting point? Let me hand it to Rachel first.
Yes, I think that there's obviously variation, as far as I can see, between the companies that I've had those conversations with. I think certainly there's more general sort of mental health policy around now and procedure. I don't think there's anything specific necessarily around trauma, around psychological trauma, that I've come across just yet. But obviously that's something that would be great to change. I think when people might have their sort of emergency procedures policies, there can be elements in there which have which provide guidance and instruction on psychological first aid and providing safe spaces and time for people to be able to sort of decompress. But it would be great to see some more movement in that. I think the minute the Maritime Labour Convention is a little bit, it can include sort of some psychological health issues in there, but it's kind of implied, it's kind of implicit between the lines. And so those who are wanting to sort of make the point around sort of psychological health can draw upon it somewhat, but again, it's not as robust as it needs to be just yet to help sort of encourage and galvanise those companies to make that a more sort of tangible part of their policy. But this is what these discussions are for, isn't it? To move things on.
Exactly. Thank you, Rachel. And same kind of question for Dan.
Not specifically, I'll be honest. There is sometimes a policy regards reasonable adjustments, or some form of DEI policy tends to be quite standard nowadays, no matter where you work or where you go. However, it tends to vary wildly from employer to employer, region to region, country to country, contract to contract. I know there's some organizations out there, some companies who have fantastic DEI policies, and they will stand behind them vigorously, which is fantastic to see, where they openly acknowledge that they need to do more about this, and they're constantly revising things, trying to keep up. And there are, unfortunately, a majority, I think we can say, who tend to see this as a checkbox. It's something we need to have from an ESG standpoint, because that means we can then get more investors through the door, because we can see, look at us, we are meeting our requirements and we're being responsible. But when it then comes down to standing behind the policy you have in place, the procedure you have in place, they won't do it. They will be very, very avoidant, shall we say. So I do think it's an area in which we need to do a lot more work in, generally, not just around neurodivergence, but around DEI and inclusivity in particular as an industry. I would like to see this taken on at a more international level, although given the issues the IMO is having at the moment, we're trying to get certain things across the line. And the rumours about Marpol potentially being quite strongly curtailed by some governments, that's a long way off, but that will be my hope, and I think that's where we need to go, that there needs to be a more coordinated effort to try and force organizations to have these policies that are actually worthwhile and usable, not just a checkbox that, look at us, we have the fastest thing, but we won't use it.
Okay, so it would be beneficial for companies to
absolutely
take the step forward themselves with it. Yeah, okay. And Dipti, maybe not a policy as such, but like some guidance on seafarers. Have you seen companies that have this? And if not, would it be beneficial for companies to have this?
Yes, so I actually, if I talk to you about what's happening in India here, and not only the companies, but there are a lot of projects now going under the Director General of Shipping from the government and the ministry, where we have had some brilliant setup of organizations coming together and working for the welfare of seafarers as well as for the families. So there are a lot of grievance redressal cells which are very active. There are a lot of helplines specifically for family and when they are in crisis. And it's not just about crisis, but even if they are facing any family issue, that is also taken care of if the seafarer is out at sea. At Sailor Society also, we have, a lot of work which is going on for the family. And those fundings and everything is also provided to the family as well. So as far as the family welfare is concerned, yes, there is a lot of shift and a lot of improvement in the past 2 years. That is one. Second, as far as mental health is concerned, a lot of companies now are signing up with NGOs. So we have so many companies who have signed up with Sailor Society, and they access our helpline numbers, they access our network numbers, and a peer-to-peer support group is superb. It's fantastic. We have over the past 1 year, it has shot up more than 200%. And we have so many of the peer support groups which are active, live and running. And so I think from that perspective, if you see, people have become more open to speak about mental health. That's how I see it. Where earlier they used to be very scared to be a part of a group, but today they're willingly being a part of a group. They're willingly accessing counseling support. They're willingly wanting to talk. So it shows a shift in understanding that people are building that awareness and they know about it and work is being done. And thirdly, the companies have also started a lot of training for officers who are sailing as far as mental health awareness, psychological first aid training. All those trainings are also being imparted now. And in Sailor Society also, we launched the Seamate program, which prepares the officers on board to take care of a person who's in distress on board. So a lot of initiatives have come through in the past 1 year, I feel, and it's looking good. It's good that people
Really
are
good.
using it.
That's really, really great. It's really positive to hear such a movement forward in this part. And yeah, maybe there's not, like, as I said, this it's not really a direct policy, but they're employing a third party like Seafarers Society to give the family and the seafarers that support. So that's really, 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 really good to hear that there's movement in that direction. Yeah. Talking about so going back to kind of the trauma side of things, if somebody has had a stress, and what then would be the signs that someone's not having normal stress response and they're not settling down, and what should be concerned for them? Rachel.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I think there's as I was sort of saying earlier on, that we've all got that propensity as humans to have that kind of stress response. It's kind of perfectly ordinary to be stressed, to be sleepless, to be anxious, to be unsettled after an incident has happened. It's a very sort of functional, very adaptive part of engaging with what might need to happen next. some of our more sanguine, sort of chilled out ancestors would have been snuffed out many years ago, and sort of picked off for their lack of response. So we need to have that stress response. I guess if those stress responses don't settle down, and if they become something which interferes with someone's functioning, then that can be something that might need some further assessment or support from people around that person. So if as a person yourself, you're experiencing that, your lack of sleep is getting in the way, you're frequently woken up with nightmares, or it feels like you've got to sleep with one eye open, that you just can't settle. If you're having sort of intrusive memories or experiences, so not just kind of having images of what's happened, but perhaps having sort of repeated sort of body memories. Our body is keep the score, as they say, and so it's sometimes our emotions, our physical set, we might find ourselves jumping out of our skin a little bit more, being agitated and irritated, and perhaps also avoidant as well. If you think, actually, I just can't go down. I can't go down into the engine room. I can't go and visit the bridge. There's just certain things that'll just feel too overwhelming. I guess it's those times, if either you spot it in yourself or you can detect it in others, that might be a time to perhaps have a sort of further conversation. Again, along the lines of, these are going to be, sort of ordinary reactions to extraordinary circumstances, and that there are things that can really help. It doesn't mean that you're mad or bad or lacking in, sort of what it takes. It just means that as humans, we all need that bit of support, bit of time out to adjust and adapt to what's happened. I think it remains an option for people to perhaps need some time off and may need to be repatriated, obviously with the support of any psychologist or mental health support that you might have available to you as a company, or sort of medical services that can help with those repatriations. But there are things that can really help from a recovery point of view, and unlike some of the sort of medical guidance that is still prevailing in shipping at the minute, contrary to that, it doesn't take 5 or 6 years to recover of sitting at home watching the TV. Actually, you can have a really good positive recovery within months, if not weeks, and you can be back on board doing your thing with added growth, with added compassion for others, with added sort of breadth of understanding what it is to be human. Makes you a fabulous leader, fabulous crew member, but it needs to be supported, and we need to be less fearful of it, more embracing of recovery and the growth that it can bring.
That's fantastic, and fantastic to know that the recovery can be quite quick, and that it's not something somebody has to live with for the rest of their life for many years.
Absolutely not. No.
That's fantastic. Okay. Well, I can see we've run over our hour a little bit, so I think it might be a good time to call the end to the webinar. Thank you very much again to the speakers for coming and joining us and talking about this very important topic. And thank you to all the attendees, and to Tom as well in our marketing department assisting all of this. And this has been recorded and will go up on our YouTube channel, and so you can share that with your friends or colleagues afterwards if they're interested in the subject. Okay, thank you again, everybody, and I hope you have a pleasant rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie.
Bye.
Thank you.